Hello everyone, this is Bakul Soman. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to head straight into the things you could say to the interrupters, the ramblers, the fast talkers, the mm-mmers in your life. How to say it so you do it effectively without hurting their feelings. Are you ready? Let's get started. Today we're going to talk about one other gear of that complex communication system. If you missed that video, make sure you check it out. The gear we're talking about today is repairing communication. Very important. In my previous video, we talked about 6 tips to become a more effective speaker. But what if somebody you're talking to is not following those tips and is not a very effective speaker? What do you do? What do you say? Okay, so some of those aspects are easier to give feedback on than others. Let's take a look. Rate of speech and imprecise or ambiguous speech are easier to give feedback on because people are not as emotionally connected to those aspects. So what could you say if somebody's speaking too fast? In quadrant 1 and quadrant 2, you can be pretty direct. And if you don't know what I'm talking about in terms of quadrant 1 and quadrant 2, check out the video we did last week. You could tell them you're speaking too fast. Can you slow down? You can say, I can't understand you when you're speaking that fast. Please slow down. You can ask for verification. Did you say XYZ? If you're in quadrant 3 or quadrant 4, you need to be a little bit more diplomatic. You might want to say, I want to make sure I get everything you're saying. Can you slow down a little bit? Or you could say, this is so interesting. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Do you mind slowing down just a bit so I catch everything? Or you could say, did you say XYZ to get clarification and verification? Okay, moving on to dealing with imprecise or ambiguous speech. This one is also pretty straightforward. You can ask clarifying questions. You can ask who, what, when, where, why, but make sure your questions are as specific as possible so you're very clearly asking them to fill in a very specific gap, some information that was left out or missing or unclear. So be very targeted in your questions. There are some other aspects of those 6 tips, video above if you missed it, that are harder to give feedback to because we tend to have a much more emotional connection to them. These are fillers, the interrupters, and verbosity, people who tend to ramble. Why do we have an emotional connection to these? Well, because they relate more to style. They relate more to the choices we make. They relate more to even values on a certain level. So giving feedback on these can cut pretty deep. So you have to be very mindful and careful when you do it. When we talk about interruptions, there are 2 kind of broad categories of interruptions. There are the benign ones, the ones where somebody's asking for clarification, the ones where they are interjecting something to either agree with you or to empathize with you. And those actually tend to enhance the quality of the interaction. So those are not the ones we're worried about. The ones we're worried about is where somebody is trying to either switch topics or switch speakers, not at the right time. All right, so what are some specific things you could say if somebody is very verbose, if they tend to go on and on and on? In the moment, you want to make sure you get the main point. So you could actually ask them, so what you're saying is, and summarize what you think the main point is. You could also say something like, I'm trying to follow along, but I'm having a hard time. Can you please reiterate your main point? Or you could say, I'm sorry, I have to blank, run to the dentist, go pick up my daughter, get on a conference call. Can you give me the basics right now and then we can talk more later? For interruptions, if you're in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2, again, watch the video if you missed it and if you don't know what I'm referring to. You can use a direct style. You could say things like, please let me finish, I wasn't done, hold on. Or you could say a few more indirect things like, as I was saying, going back to what I was saying, where was I? What was I saying? Anyway, those are slightly more indirect ways of giving feedback in the moment for interruptions. If you're in quadrant 3 or quadrant 4, Your indirect feedback might have to be even more diplomatic. You could say something like, "Thank you for sharing your thoughts. May I finish what I was saying? I understand your point. May I continue what I was saying?" For verbosity, fillers, and interruptions, if you're in quadrant 2 or quadrant 4, you want to think about giving feedback at a later time. And you want to pick a moment that's optimal, where things are calm, neutral, positive. In these conversations, first start by emphasizing the relationship. You're only doing it because the relationship is important to you. Make sure you convey that. You could say something like, "I really value you as a friend, colleague, boss, mentor, partner. I value our ability to communicate honestly." Acknowledge something that they do well, right? This is just one aspect of what's going wrong. There are a lot of things that go well. Acknowledge one of the things that do go well, and then introduce that you want to talk about something that's been on your mind. All right, so you could say something like, "I appreciate how you XYZ, but I wanted to talk to you about something that's been on my mind. You are so good about XYZ, but here's something that I find challenging." Tell them how it affects you. Remember, this is about you telling them you need their help to help make your communication better. And you're telling them what specifically you need help with. So you're bringing it on you. You are not trying to tell them this is something you do wrong. All right, so you could say something like, "When we're talking, I hear a lot of or word repetitions. When this happens, I get distracted. I start focusing on them as opposed to what you're saying. Can you help me by trying to be mindful about that?" I don't see this conversation happening with a boss, but I do see it happening with somebody that you have a close relationship with. You could tell them, "I feel frustrated when I get interrupted when we talk. When I get interrupted, it is challenging for me to express my thoughts properly. I tend to lose my train of thought when I'm interrupted. I really value your feedback, but it would really help me if I'm able to complete my thoughts before you share it." So, emphasize the relationship, acknowledge something they do well, and then tell them how it affects you, whatever the problematic behavior is, how it affects you. On the far end of this, if you see that that person is really trying to make an effort to bring about change in how they communicate, acknowledge it. It is a lot of work to make change. We know this. So acknowledge it. Appreciate it. "I appreciate you letting me finish my thoughts. It made me feel listened to, like you valued what I have to say." And last but not the least, make sure when you're giving your feedback, you are staying calm and you are staying composed. If emotion takes over, if you do it with a lot of anger, with a lot of emotion in your voice, the emotion is going to trump whatever it is you're saying. So no matter how you craft your actual message, the emotions are going to dominate. That's what people are going to hear, not the actual words. All right, so we talked about a lot of stuff related to giving feedback. I hope you found it interesting. If you did, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you again next week with another video. Let's thrive together.